Hey everybody, what is up? I'm your host, Brittany Baldi of the Lifestyle Sports Podcast, The BosBabes. We have another fantastic episode today, and joining me is David Holloway. He is actually an athlete, a motivational speaker, and all of the above. Please stay with us. We have so much to talk about. First, we need to get into the fact that he is not one, not two, but the third generation of pro athletes in his family. His dad played pro football. Grandpa played with the Boston Bruins with Bobby Orr, I've heard, through the grapevine. And David actually played college football and pro football, and he's a motivational speaker. Like, holy cow, what don't you do? David, welcome to the podcast.
Well, that was a great intro, and thanks for having me. This is going to be fun, so we could jump right into this. Let's go.
I'm so excited for it. So first off, we need to jump into the fact that you actually grew up in Newton, Massachusetts. Football is in your blood. You were actually born on game day, and I heard through the grapevine that the Pats actually beat the Saints on the day that you were born. So let's chat about that. Growing up in Massachusetts, I know your dad played football. I don't want to talk about that just yet, but let's just talk about the day that you were born.
Okay, well, I remember it like it was yesterday. Corny jokes aside, yes, Massachusetts in my blood. Patriots, Bruins, home team for life. A lot of people ask me that, even though I was on different teams later. There'll always be a special place for them. I was born on a game day where my dad beat the Saints, and they gave me the game ball of that game. And on the game ball it says, and I still have it, it says, "To the youngest Patriot." My name, and Sullivan Stadium, Patriots win 7-0. There's a whole story about how my dad was gonna go to the game, and then he went to the hospital, and then he went back to the game, and it was an ice storm, so crazy day. But Boston, Massachusetts, through in and throughout.
So through and through, I love that story. That might be the most interesting birthing story I might have ever heard in my life, especially on this podcast. So you spent a good amount of time in Newton, Mass. What were some of your best memories growing up in Massachusetts? And what were some of your favorite dishes that either your dad made for dinner if he cooked? I mean, I understand he had a busy schedule. Or did your mom cook for you guys? What were some of your favorite home-cooked meals back home when you were younger?
Home-cooked meals, well, you reminded me of something of the last question. So real quick on the story. So when I was getting born, I got born late at night. So my dad played the game, rushed back, and my dad told me the story where he was in the delivery room and all these alarms were going off. I mean, it was crazy. So he was wondering what's going on, but I'm about, my mom's in labor, and all of a sudden the door to her room just bursts open, and the entire offensive line, Hogg, Hannah, and all the old school guys burst in the room, and they brought champagne. I mean, it was, and you're not supposed to do that, but who's going to stop the offensive line for the Patriots in the hospital, right? So they busted in. My dad freaked. My mom told him to get the hell out. I mean, it was a big scene. So that was a little small part I wanted to add into the birthing story, but
I'm sure your mom will never forget that moment, or your dad, ever.
She won't. And he was trying to push him out. And I mean, I don't want to get into specifics, but she yelled at him to tell him to get out, and they finally listened to her. But that was a whole. It was in the Boston Globe. I mean, that was a whole thing. So yeah, quite an entrance into the world. Growing up cooking, both my parents, I hate to throw them under the bus, but neither one of them were good cooks. They were really young to give them some kind of credit, but what they did make, it was basic stuff that I liked. I mean, I'm pretty simple even now. I mean, I even like, grilled cheese is still one of my favorite sandwiches. I've traveled all over the place, tried so many different things. I'm open-minded, so I'm always going to try stuff. But I'm a pretty simple guy. I mean, one thing that a lot of, people in Boston, up north, think I'm crazy for is I don't like seafood. And, the crabs, the lobster, all that, I just never really got into it. But my parents can cook, don't get me wrong, but nothing that would blow your mind, or what I would, tell them to write down that recipe. I really need to remember that. But my grandparents, different story. They could cook, but not my parents, not so much.
I think that's an excellent answer, and it's super cute because I feel like some people would just make something up and be like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, my mom makes a mean mac and cheese or a really good lasagna." You're just like, you know what, whatever. Like they were good at other stuff, but the cooking not so much. I love the fact that you actually had 7 siblings growing up, or you were one of 7. So, what was it like being the oldest of 7? How many brothers? How many sisters? Was it all boys, all mostly girls, and you're the one boy? How did that play out?
So that was an interesting dynamic too. My dad always wanted to have a lot of kids. There was 4 boys, 2 girls, and me. So, it was chaos. I mean, I was the oldest, so I ended up being, as any older sibling out there knows, you're like the third parent. You're the person that, breaks up the fights with the little ones. You're the mediator. You're the one that people come to when, you don't want to come to mom or dad. And another thing you do you are the leader of the bunch, so you have to lead and show by example. So there's a little bit more pressure on the oldest to help raise all these freaking kids, because when we used to go to like Sam's Club or BJ's, I mean, we would have 2 full carts, and my dad would be spending, 500, 600, 700 bucks, just so to feed all of us. We're mostly boys, and we're not small either, so we're eating more than usual. So it was a lot of fun. I love having big families. I feel bad for people that are, the only child, because there's just so much you can do and so many more adventures and so many more people. When you're the oldest, you have so many more people you could pick on if you're bored. So it's just fun having that many siblings.
I come from, I guess, like a medium-sized family. I had my mom, my dad. They actually met in high school, so they've been together for a very long time as well.
Yeah, cool.
And I had a brother and a sister, so I was also the oldest. So I totally resonate with you saying that you kind of had to like lead the way, and
Absolutely.
when things went wrong, you were kind of the one that got in trouble because you kind of didn't want your younger siblings to get in trouble, so you kind of took the blame for it, and you had to do all the babysitting and whatnot when you got older. So I totally resonate with all of that. So I guess that kind of answered my question of what was it like growing up with all those siblings, and was it tough being the oldest of 7? How were the holidays with the family? I'm sure you just talked about having freaking 2 full carts full of food. So
Oh, yeah.
freaking Christmas, I can only imagine how many gifts you guys had under that tree with the 7 kids.
And everything was an event. So Christmas was an event. I'll tell you what did on the other end of that. When I think of holidays, I usually go, and I'm a motivational speaker, so I usually don't go to the negative, but I usually go to Thanksgiving. And for whatever reason, doing the dishes during Thanksgiving was just the last thing you wanted to do. I mean, especially when we had people over. So, I mean, you're talking 20, 30 people, and it takes, I don't know how long it took. It seemed like it took 3 hours to wash all those dishes. I mean, you did not want to get stuck doing that. And my dad usually had me, the oldest, do most of the stuff. So that's kind of where my mind goes first. There's so many other good stories and good times with, that many people there. But, oh man, Thanksgiving dishes were just something you did not. I don't even like thinking about it now. I mean, that's how painful that memory is. But yeah, everything else was fun. Christmas was fun until my grandmother, she would make us, we would go crazy opening the presents, but at my grandmother's house, we would go there after. She would make us open the gifts one at a time so she could see our reaction and everything. And waiting on Christmas as a kid for, 6, 7 other people to go before he could open another gift. And that was not fun either.
Oh my gosh, it probably took you guys like 2 weeks to open your gifts if there were so many kids with like the cousins and the parents and the aunts and the uncles. You guys are probably there freaking for weeks trying to open up all these Christmas gifts. But it sounds like a lot of fun. Almost like the Brady Bunch, kind of.
Yeah, it was. So many more good memories and fun. This is what my dad wanted. He always wanted a bunch of kids, and that's, what he got. And we had a blast. We're still close today. A lot of people, it's funny, a lot of people say, I'm jealous of, your guys' relationship. You come over and it's a big get together. Everybody playing board games. We're having a good time, just being around each other, but that's kind of how it always was.
I love learning about your family. I love learning about your background. Love learning about your childhood. Like that is one of the biggest things on the Boss Babes Lifestyle Sports podcast is what shapes the pro athlete, the reality TV competitor, the athlete's wife and girlfriend, like what shapes the person into who they are. And I think family is a big part of why you are so amazing at what you do now, especially being a motivational speaker, being that leader, taking that leadership role, both on and off the field. I want to hop right into the fact that you guys also had a ton of fun family parties at your New York summer home. So let's talk about that awesome time. It sounds like you had a fantastic time in New York.
Yeah, so during the season, we'd be in Cambridge. And in the off season, we'd be in Stephentown, New York, which is, if you get on 90 and you head east for about 2.5, 3 hours, you'll run right into it. It's right next to the Berkshire Mountains. It's way out in the country. It's beautiful. So there's tons of space, and we had tons of acres. So people would just drive up and park on the lawn, one of those kind of things. And when my dad was playing, he'd have, teammates over, and because it was a small town, all the people, you would hear about these things, and a lot of the locals would come. A lot of them were farmers. So they're bringing all really fresh food, roasting things, fresh corn, so it was just a big, over the summer, it was a party. I mean, there was volleyball nets, there was ping pong tournaments, there was slip and slide. We had a barn where my dad, he converted it into, it was kind of like his weight room off to the side, but he put strobe light in there and have music. I mean, it was just, summer times were a lot of fun, and there was always somebody there, whether it was from the Patriots or family coming in town. The best summers, that I can remember, just everybody having a good time. It was a lot of fun.
Literally just being able to not only enjoy your time during season in Massachusetts, being able to go to New York, which is not that far of a drive. For those of you guys that are listening, maybe from a different country or listening from a different state, the drive to and from Massachusetts to New York, depending on where you are, can be anywhere from 2.5 to 5, 6 hours. So to be able to be that close to your home state is pretty amazing. So I also wanted to mention the fact that not only did you spend a good amount of time in New York, having your parties and hanging out with family and friends, obviously spending a ton of time in the Boston area, but you also got to live in Los Angeles, California for a bit. Your dad got traded to the Raiders. Again, we aren't on the topic of football yet, but I just want to mention that way people can get a backstory on why you spent time in LA. So how old were you when you actually went over to LA? Did you get to experience any of the beaches there? And did you enjoy Boston or California more? Do you remember? Were you too young?
No, I remember. I remember going to LA, and I was young. I was probably like 5, 6, 7. And he got traded near the end of his career out to LA, and that's when it was the LA Raiders. That's back when they had, their two running backs were Marcus Allen and Bo Jackson. So they had, and he was blocking for him. So they had an unbelievable offense just from that alone. And listen, I was, we're telling all these stories. It just reminds me, I was so lucky to be around all of this. I was around world champions, world-class competitors, athletes, just good people, so much of my early life. And it's one of the things that, as we talked about, as you mentioned, so one of the things that molded and shaped who I was. So when you're around this kind of greatness and this kind of atmosphere, and that know how to work and are good teammates and good people, that really shapes who you are and who you turn out to be. But getting back to your question, I was a young kid. The thing I liked most about being in LA was there was a Chuck E. Cheese that was almost right across the street from where we lived. So my most favorite memories, and the beach, because Boston, they doesn't really have a beach like LA. So the beach there, all the cool artsy people, the colors. I remember back then the Love Bug cars were big, and they had all this graffiti and art all over it. So I loved LA. Boston was great. LA was just different. When you've been there, it's just a different vibe out there. It's a vibe that a lot of people just stay because it's just that cool. So, but Chuck E. Cheese was my best memory. I was a little kid then,
You can't go wrong with Chuck E. Cheese. We have Chuck E. Cheese in Massachusetts too. I don't know if it's still a thing in Massachusetts, but I definitely remember the little Chuck E. Cheese, the mouse, and the pizza, and going in the little ball pit as a kid. So I'm with you with the
Yeah.
Chuck E. Cheese. You guys are now listening to David Holloway, motivational speaker and athlete. Stick with us. We are learning all about his childhood, the fact that his dad's Patriots team, the New England Patriots O-lineman, freaking barged in while David's mom was giving birth. And that probably is one of my favorite stories that I think I've heard on this podcast. And I've interviewed a lot of people. Please stay with us. We're going to be talking all about football, pro sports, college sports, motivational speaking, and everything in between. So you actually spent a good amount of time in both North Carolina and Maryland. And those are some of your favorite vacation spots to visit in your younger years. So let's chat about that for a bit.
So yeah, my roots, my family's roots on my dad's side are North Carolina and Maryland. And my mom, everybody's in Boston. So I had a cousin that lived down south, Winston-Salem, and I would spend some summers with him. And I loved it. My great grandmother, who lived till she was, I think, 102, lived in Greensboro, and we would visit her. That's where she was the queen. So we all traveled to her. We'd have our family reunions there. And so North Carolina was a place that I spent a lot of time. And I still have two sisters, the twins are there, and I have a brother there. So I'm there all the time. I was there last month, actually. And Maryland is another place. My grandfather and grandmother, they lived in Potomac. We would visit them all the time. That's where my dad, uncle, and aunt, that's where they grew up. And that's where I went to college. So it's like a second home. If Boston, New York are like my first, I'd say Maryland is my second. I love the people there. I love DC, Baltimore. I have so many friends there that are just dear to my heart. And it's a great place. It's like kind of like the North and South meet, and I really enjoyed spending summers there with my grandparents and just playing there in general. This is a great place.
They are both great places, and I'm not just saying this because I'm sitting here talking to you, but I'm in Winston-Salem as we speak. For a lot of you guys that are listening right now to the BosBabes Lifestyle Sports Podcast, you guys also know that my boyfriend is a professional athlete as well. He grew up right in Winston-Salem. Greensboro is right down the street from us, and he actually went to college in North Carolina as well. So he is from the area, and he travels to and from Boston with me fairly often, obviously not during the baseball season, but we actually love Baltimore, Maryland. We're all about the blue crab and stopping off and getting some crabs when we can during our freaking road trips.
Yeah.
So David, we're here for it. Maybe we could all stop off and get some crabs together in Maryland.
Absolutely. Listen, I will sit there with you, but I don't like any of the seafood there.
Oh yeah, you did say you don't like seafood.
Everybody talks about the Maryland crabs, and I've tried them from a bunch of different restaurants. That's just not my thing. But in the Inner Harbor there in Baltimore, there's plenty of good eats. So we could definitely meet up and hop around.
This sounds like the freaking coolest birthday party ever. Your parents invited your whole class. They set up an obstacle race or some type of obstacle course. So let's talk about that birthday party. You're in 5th grade. You're kind of young. You're like obviously athletic. So you probably were like, yes, mom and dad, this is freaking awesome. Let's talk about this obstacle course and that great birthday memory.
Yeah, I'd have to think of why, or if I came up with the theme. We'll just go with that. I came up with the theme. My parents didn't do that. So it was 5th grade. We invited the entire class. So I went to a small school in Albany Academy. So there's probably only like 30, 40 kids in my grade, which is still a lot for one birthday. And, we had the space to host way out in the country. So they set up an obstacle course. I remember there was like a Frisbee toss and all the other things like races, tag, a place where there is paper and you got a clue on where to go next. So it was a whole obstacle course. And I remember just having so much fun having that many people there and just running around. It was a nice day out there. We have a ton of land. So getting the whole class there, goofing off as a kid, just another great memory that I had, growing up.
It sounds like you have always been involved in being athletic, being competitive. Even when it came to birthday parties, you yourself helped your parents set up a really fun obstacle course and obstacle race. I want to jump right into the sports talk because we've been talking about your childhood for the last 20 minutes now, and I'm sure people are loving it. I love when people get to know the athlete as a child. Like, I feel like it's so freaking important because a lot of people, they see you guys on TV, they see you guys play your college games, or they read your stats on ESPN.com, but not everybody gets to learn the behind the scenes of the fact that you did everything as a child. You have all these siblings. You are very family oriented. So I love having all these great discussions. Sports as a kid, you enjoyed watching hockey, basketball, and football. Why were those sports in particular? Obviously, we know why you watch football, but why did you also enjoy hockey and basketball? And which athletes as a kid did you enjoy looking up to the most, aside from your dad, of course?
So, yeah, those are the big three. And football and hockey were easy just because I grew up around that. You said in the beginning, my grandfather, he played. So all the big bad Bruins I was around. I remember skating on the Boston Garden Ice when I was a little kid, like 3-4 years old. So super lucky to be around that environment. So hockey and football was just something I grew up around. It was something that, I remember watching on TV. I remember going to the games. So it just felt kind of natural. And, being from, parents that are both world-class athletes, it was just, it was easy for me to do. And it was a lot of fun. I loved moving around. And basketball was kind of my own kind of thing. I mean, being in New York, being in the Northeast, basketball was huge. And it was just something that I just picked up and really enjoyed. My dad, he put up in one of the barns, he put up a basketball hoop. And I would be out there, and even though I was, too small, I'd get a trampoline, and I would, jump off the trampoline and dunk. And I just really liked it. It was one of the sports where I just had so much fun doing it. And if you ask me, I mean, obviously I look up to my family first, but in each sport I looked up to, if you take out my family, Walter Payton in football was somebody I really looked up to. Just because he was the running back. He's the guy that gets the ball. He scores all these touchdowns. And, I was lucky enough to meet him, play with his kid when he was little. And we'll get into that more in a little bit. But Walter Payton was one. Bobby Orr was another one. In basketball, obviously Jordan, just because, he's Michael Jordan. How could you not be a fan of his? But those would be my main three.
Michael Jordan all the way. Just like you said, how could you not like Michael Jordan? I don't think I've ever met somebody that either A, doesn't like Michael Jordan, or B, doesn't know who he is. Like,
the greatest,
it's kind of like Tiger Woods. Like, if you don't know who Tiger Woods is, there's something going on with whoever that person is.
Right.
Living under a rock.
For real. I am, in my book, there's a big debate. Jordan will always be untouchable. He is the greatest by far, in my opinion.
100%. I truly believe the GOAT of basketball players. He's like the Tom Brady of basketball, I think. We are now slowly getting into David Holloway and the fact that he has been involved in sports his whole freaking life. From the time that the time that he was born till now, he's been involved in sports. Fun fact. His dad played professional football, which we will talk about later on in the show. But I need to talk about your grandfather. Your grandfather. Like, what the heck? I would have never guessed this in a million years. Your grandfather won not one, but 2 Stanley Cups with the Boston Bruins. Your grandfather is nicknamed Johnny Pie. He's a Boston legend. Everybody knows who he is. His actual name is John McKenzie. His NHL debut was in 1958 with the Chicago Blackhawks. He played with a number of teams, but in 1965 and 1966, he was with the Rangers. They traded him over to the Boston Bruins. He actually scored 169 goals in 7 years for the Boston Bruins, and he won 2 cups in 1970 and one in 1972. But listen up. When I did the research on this, I was like, what the heck? He played with some of the freaking greats. His grandfather played with Phil Esposito, Johnny Busick, and the legend of all legends himself, Bobby Orr. So, David, we need to talk about the fact that your grandfather, I think this was the first thing I asked you before you and I even hopped on this podcast today. I was like, hold on. Did your grandfather actually play with Bobby Orr and Phil Esposito and Johnny Busick? And was he a part of the amazing 1970s Stanley Cup jumping through the air Bobby Orr goal, 40 seconds in overtime? Bobby Orr scores to win 4-3 over the St. Louis Blues, a 4-game sweep to win the cup. How freaking iconic is it knowing that your grandfather is basically known as a Boston sports legend? Like, that's badass. David, that is beyond badass.
It is. And listen, he was a badass, and he's the superstar of the family. If you ask anybody, there's just something special about that team that is legendary. I mean, people don't forget that. And I was so lucky to grow up in that and still call some of these guys family today because of the tight-knit, bond they had and some of the amazing things they're able to do, because Boston really, Boston's spoiled now with all the winning they've done the past, 20, 25 years. But, Boston was kind of a blue-collar town. They weren't really winning that much. And the big bad Bruins come along, and it's just, it's like, I don't know what to call it. I don't think anybody does. But it's something that just lives on. The legend almost just keeps getting bigger and bigger, and how iconic it was, the kind of juice that all these guys had walking around Boston. I mean, he literally could go anywhere he wanted, 40, 50 years after this happened. And I remember we were celebrating his 83rd birthday, and we went to this really nice sushi place. We walked in, everybody move out of the way, the red carpet treatment. We had, I think, 20 people with us, no problem. The owner comes down, shakes all of our hands, and he's like, "Get whatever you want, it's on me." And this was his 83rd birthday. So the impact they had, how they were able to touch so many people and shape so many people's childhood memories. I mean, it was unbelievable. And I wanted to soak it in, because he was getting older, and I knew this, just being a part of something that special was even special for me, and being in it you can't really put it into words. I mean, they are absolute superstars in Boston. It's almost like, if Tom Brady goes back now, how they're on that level of legends in Boston, and it's something that will never be forgotten. And Bobby Orr's statue's out there. I see him maybe once a year, every other year, and he always checks on me. It was a very, very special time, and very proud. And it's just cool to have your grandfather and your family be linked to that.
Well, congratulations to your family. I think that is one of the most interesting and cool facts of all time. Just not only to hear that you are a third generation pro athlete, maybe your daughter someday will go pro in soccer. We will talk about that later on as well. It sounds like she is a skilled little girl currently playing sports herself. But I think it's so freaking amazing that you are a third generation pro athlete. Your grandfather played with one of the most iconic Boston Bruins teams of all time, one of the most iconic games, legendary Stanley Cup finals of all time, as you just talked about. That statue of Bobby Orr is still there. Like,
oh yeah, it'll
probably be there forever. So your grandfather is going to be enshrined in Boston history forever.
Yeah. It just, it's amazing. Even talking about it and reminiscing on some of the things that, I was able to do and people I was able to be around. It's really just amazing. Really, really cool part of history.
David Holloway, He is a motivational speaker and athlete. We just got to know a ton about his iconic grandfather, who played alongside of many talented athletes. So we need to talk about your dad now. Brian Holloway played pro from 1981 to 1988, not ice hockey, football to be exact.
Mhm.
He was drafted in 1981, first round, pick number 19. He was an O-lineman, three-time Pro Bowler, played in the 1988 Super Bowl. So let's discuss your bond with your dad. What have you learned from him? And
So, again, really fortunate to just have sports in my DNA and grow up around it. He showed me and taught me a lot. And a lot of it wasn't about sports. A lot of it was life skills. And, he really didn't need to teach me too much, just because I was always around sports, always around athletes. And it was just something I was naturally good at. But we had a very good bond growing up. Both my parents, they both taught me a lot, mainly about life. And it translates to sports, translates to teamwork, translates to leadership. So again, very fortunate to grow up in the environment I did. And a lot of people, and now I know this is a sports show and we're talking sports, but that's a small part of our family dynamic. Education is really what my family got started in. My uncle now is the president of Rutgers College, and he's just one of the many lines of educators in our family. I have a great grandfather who worked in the White House and the presidential cabinet, two grandfathers actually. So that's just one of the dynamics that was what I was around. So again, very lucky to be around that and still around that. And that's one of the reasons I'm doing what I'm doing now, is really just teaching a lot of the lessons I learned growing up, being around that environment, to many, many different companies, many different CEOs, many different people that are looking for peak performance. I don't take that for granted. I realize, I stand on the shoulders of giants. And that's something I'll never take for granted or not appreciate.
it sounds like you definitely had a strong core group of leaders around you. Again, we've already talked about your grandpa, your father. It sounds like you are surrounded by a lot of influential people in your life. And yes, it is a sports podcast, which is why we are talking about the sports. But we are 100% going to be talking about the motivational speaking, because I'm actually pretty curious, and I know the listeners are going to be curious to find out how you went from pro sports and moved over to motivational speaking. Before we get into that, I want to start talking about your career. We've talked about your grandpa. We've talked a little bit about your dad, but this is your podcast. So let's just hop right into you, college and pro. So you played college football at the University of Maryland, 3-year starter at linebacker, 186 career tackles, ranked first on the team among active players in 2006. You were just a walk-on, which I find pretty amazing, and you played in the 2007 Hula Bowl. You were rated number 5 senior outside linebackers by ESPN.com in 2006. So let's talk about some college football a bit. How was it walking onto a college team and knowing that you just had to kind of prove yourself a bit?
Yeah, so that's one of the things that a lot of people think, you have all-star athletes on both sides of your family, it's a given. And it really wasn't. I started off, I'll tell you a quick story. In high school, I had no scholarships my senior year. I played basketball, football 4 years. I lettered, won, a couple awards. But, I was playing in Albany, New York, upstate New York. Nobody really even heard of that. And nobody was playing football up there. And, that wasn't just an excuse. I was really small to be a linebacker also. And the story is, I remember, so we'll rewind a little bit. This was back in 2002. 850 Division I colleges, over 10,000 scouts and coaches None of them thought I was good enough. And, you'd think having my grandfather and dad, but it didn't matter. They looked at me, they said, he's too small. He doesn't have his grandfather's toughness. He doesn't have his dad's size, being 6'7", I'm only 6'2". And, sports really just isn't in your future. And that was a conversation that I didn't have just once. I mean, it was over and over and over again. And, being around that championship world-class competitor atmosphere, it was, you know what? You're going to make your own dreams and visions and goals, and you're going to run after them no matter what. That's what you've been around. That's what we expect. That's what we do. Proving people wrong, and that's just something that I've been around my whole life. So walking on, I had to walk on because I didn't get a scholarship. I chose the University of Maryland, and when I first got there, I was super pumped, happy to be there. I was going to take another step in my athletic journey. And, I just got I thought by the second day I was almost ready to quit. I got abused. I came in playing linebacker. I was probably 100, and I think I weighed in 187 pounds, which a linebacker, that's a joke. That's a receiver weight. For a linebacker, you got to be, I'd say 230 to like 270 to even stand a chance, because you just get tossed around because you're too small. So I was too slow to play receiver or anything else. So I tried linebacker. We had some amazing linebackers on the team already, led by E.J. Henderson. He was two-time consensus All-American. Butkus Award winner. He was everything. So I had a very good person to look up to and say, okay, this is the mark. If I want to do good here, here's your standard. But, I walked on, thought I made a mistake. Second day, I wanted to quit. I was given number 36, which 2 other players had. And I'll never forget, we were lining up for picture day, and we were supposed to line up numerically. And when I found my place in line, everybody was laughing. And I didn't know what was going on. I thought I had like a kick me sign or some freshman hazing or something was going on. I don't know why everybody's looking, pointing, and laughing at me. It was because there's 2 other 36s already in line. And that was the first day. And I remember going out to practice. I barely could get in because I was on the 6th team. And I was the only one. And I remember the first day I got there, I went into one of the boardrooms and I saw the depth chart, and there was a green sticker on it that said captain. I was looking around like, maybe they know something in me. Maybe this is a joke, or maybe they know my grandfather, my dad. There's all a big, jokes on me thing. But the only reason I had that sticker there was because I was the only one on the 16. There was nobody else. So if they called out the 16 to go out, even in practice, only this guy would be running out in the field. It was I couldn't even get into practice. That's how pathetic it was. I was way underweight. Anytime I'd get on the scale, the other linebackers would laugh at me because we had to weigh in. It was just a nightmare, to where day number 2, I was like, you know what? Those 10,850 were right. This probably isn't for me. I don't know if I could keep this up. Why I can't even get into practice, so I'm not getting a chance. Everybody's laughing at me. And, this is just not something I was ready for. And, I tell people, there's so many other stories. I couldn't, there was a dining hall facility that opened up right above our locker room. Walk-ons weren't allowed to eat there, so I couldn't even eat with the regular team. I had to run and scramble and find food, just so I could eat. It was.
That's kind of weird. That was so segregated like that.
Yeah, I remember looking through the glass at my other teammates, watching them, because this is a brand new facility, so everything's nice and brand new. There's TVs, marble floors, all this, and the food was just for the football team. I remember looking through the glass and just being pissed that I couldn't eat in there. And then I had to go find somewhere else to eat. And not only did I have to find somewhere else to eat, but I had to do it fast because, we had meetings. So as soon as you're done as soon as you're done practice, which I watched most of, Then, you go in to eat. You have team meetings, right after that. So I literally had to run to get my food. I couldn't eat in the dining hall because I had to get back. So I had to literally run and eat every day.